Hello, welcome to Big Bang Radio Spotlights. This is a show where we talk to independent artists from all around the world all about their music and their process for making it. I'm your host, Isaac Anderson, and today I get to sit down with James Wallace from the musical project Skyway Man. Without any further ado, here's the interview. James, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. Before we kind of get into your music, I wanted to kind of go back to the beginning of your musical journey, and I ask all the artists I talk to this question: what is your earliest musical memory?
Oh, probably getting my first... Actually, no, it would be the 45 of the Ghostbusters theme song on my Fisher-Price record player in the playroom growing up. It was the Ghostbusters theme song, but then on the B-side was the instrumental, so I could just make up my own words and sing along, and I would just go back and forth.
Dang, do you think your lyrics were better than what Ray Parker Jr. did?
No way. Well, I think wherever my head was at back, I mean, I was in a very free associative state at 3. So, you know, I might look back at the words if I could remember them and think they're better than what I can come up with now, possibly.
That's pretty cool. Well, how exactly did you get started playing music? Because you obviously play a lot of instruments. You're very well versed in a lot of things. What was the first instrument that you really picked up and fell in love with?
Piano was my first instrument. I got taken to lessons starting around 4, and I just had a really easygoing piano teacher who taught me through books with a lot of cartoons, and then, you know, that combined with my mom being not strict but just adamant that I go to piano lessons every week, and yeah, I guess that kind of helped me stay in the game.
Is your family pretty musical? Like, I don't know if your parents play music, or like if anybody in your family, if you have siblings or anything like that, but was there somebody in your life that really was like a big catalyst for you to like want to pursue this kind of musical thing?
I think my parents both love music a lot, and especially my dad. And but probably the most practical reason was that my mom bought a piano when she was young, as a way to it was the first large thing she owned. I think she got it when she was still a teenager and kept it. And just having the piano was kind of what signaled to them that I should get piano lessons, because I would go up and bang on it a lot, nonsensically, and so if just simply by that being there was probably the single catalyst, which I'm grateful for.
Were you in bands before, you were ever even thinking about Skyway Man? Like, were you ever like the front man, or like were you always some like behind the scenes? If you were, I don't know. What's that kind of story like?
I've been in a lot of bands. And many of them, there's many bands I've just joined up with as a player, and there are bands that I joined and then, whether I should have or not, rustled my way up to the front and started running the band. But I guess my main previous project before Skyway Man was still just kind of my own project, which is called James Wallace and the Naked Light. I did that for several years. Then I was in some bands in high school and college. They were fun. They taught me a lot about what I needed to know to run my own thing, I guess.
How exactly did Skyway Man start? Like you said, you had your own kind of solo project before this. Was that basically just a natural progression to like from that into this, or like was it a conscious decision, like I want to get away from that kind of sound that I was doing before and do this kind of new thing?
I think it was a distillation. It's not so different from what I'd done in the past, but it needed more focus, and I needed to create I needed to like create a Frankenstein, or I needed to be Frankenstein and create the monster that would be the next step, and not just think about it as like a wide, all-encompassing thing anymore. And yeah, so then I kind of started conceiving of what this might need to look like and sound like.
Do you need power? Do you need darkness in the night. Sometimes it leads us to hallelujah, hallelujah.
Skyway Man's a very cool name. How exactly did you go about coming up with that name?
Well, do you want the good story or the true story?
How about we hear both and we compare and contrast?
Well, I'll tell you one, and we can just kind of follow it wherever it leads us. There's a place in outside of Seattle called the Bryn Mawr Skyway, and it's a unincorporated, somewhat low-income town. I've never been before, but I've heard a lot of stories about it, and I think of it as sort of a parallel to the Florida Man conundrum, where because so many newspapers tend to report police reporting in a certain way, that you kind of wind up with this like excess of Florida Man as a concept, for being someone who's fallen on hard times and broken the law in one way or another. And it didn't take long in the process of becoming and adopting Skyway Man for me to begin realizing that anytime someone commits a felony in the unincorporated town of Bryn Mawr Skyway, that Skyway Man is now the new Florida Man. And that felt really fitting to me, that that somewhere out there are human beings who have done unsavory things and are getting their story told through the lens of the name Skyway Man. Not as it's a good thing necessarily. It's just a really fascinating idea to me.
Kind of hopping onto your songwriting process, because myself, I'm a huge fan of the way that your lyricism goes. I feel like there's a lot of poetic stuff in there, and I feel like there's even a little bit of some personal stuff in there. And I want to ask you a little bit more about that in just a minute. But when you start creating your music, do you start from like the drums, bass, and then like you kind of go up and then make the lyrics around it, or do you like tend to try to say I want everything to be crafted around the story, and then everything else just kind of flows from that? I don't know. How exactly do you go about putting the stuff together?
I think it usually comes from a melody, and thinking about what kind of story that simple melody would be played on top of, and then I kind of maybe write lyrics that go to the story that seems to connect with the melody, sort of like jump over and come back through. And it takes a long time for me to finish songs and write lyrics, so it's hard to also remember what stage of the process I'm in at any time. I do think that I kind of like this whatever story that it lands on is influenced by the music, and vice versa, and the lyrics kind of end up coming slowly and sometimes don't get finished until like the very last step. But oftentimes it all sort of sits up here for a long time until the day that I book time in a studio, and then within a matter of 5 hours, like the basicness of the song is down, and I'm relieved that it's finally out of my head.
Kind of going on lyrics right now. So when you craft your lyrics, you said the story to the lyrics are kind of influenced by the story of the music and everything. Do you tend to go for a story that's like very experiential in nature, like something that you actually have gone through from your own personal experiences, or do you like tend to try to craft something that's kind of fictional, like a figurative story, or like are you more of like just I'm going to go for story, but I want to make sure that it's all phonetics? I imagine you're all story kind of based like that.
Yeah, I tend to hang my stories through a fictional fantasy realm a little bit. I think it gives me more permission to dive deeper into the the mystery and the emotion and the epicness of things. Because then I'm not so caught up on whether this specific experience I've had is like worthy of explaining. I think once I take it through the lens of some other kind of otherworldly story, then it's easier for me to kind of move move with more agency in coming up with stuff. There are songs I think that are pretty close, more close to just me riffing on pretty personal stories. But generally, by the end, I've found a way to add in words or add in context that lend itself to just like a separate fiction, I suppose.
When I hear your music, I get a lot of 50s vibes kind of going, even like 60s vibes, almost like some Pink Floyd, a little Beatles in there. I don't know if that's what you were going for, but it's just that sort of like kind of vintage, kind of deep, low end kind of thing. It just feels nice to listen to, and there's also really great storytelling and production. For those that maybe haven't even heard your music and just watching this interview, how would you describe your sound to people?
Oh, wow. I feel like I've rehearsed in my mind what to say to this so many times, and every time I get asked this question, I just like blank. I'm like, I just don't. It's I mean, I've heard it described as like cosmic, neo psychedelia, rock and roll. All that stuff works if you want it to. The idea is that it's just kind of they're the best vehicles I can come up with for telling these songs. I like a broader type of music than even what I choose to produce for Skyway Man, but it's just kind of the best parts of my history and relationship with rock and roll, leaning towards more of a like widely arranged cosmic psychedelic kind of world.
Now, did you go into this project saying this is how I want it to sound, these are the elements, these are the kind of instruments that's going to include, and I don't really want to stray away from that? Or is it more of a, like, I'm just going to make something and this is just the way it comes out? Because I know you said earlier, like, you kind of made this attempt to kind of maybe be more focused than some of your past projects.
I'm the kind of person that would feel less anxiety going into a studio if I had everything charted out more or less and crafted. And so I do tend to obsess over that on the front end. But what I like to do to present myself with, it's not really conflict, it's more of like a positive foil, is that when I go and I record, I try to bring together my favorite musicians who I also really respect creatively, so that when we're in there, I can defer to them. I can let the song change, sometimes really significantly, depending on what idea gets presented. It helps for me to demo the songs out so that I can get all the ideas that I want to hear like down. And sometimes just by doing that, I am now released of having to commit to them. And then when I hear somebody else's idea, I can actually like square that with what I've done in the past and be like, oh, that idea is better. Let's go that direction. So yeah, it leans heavily towards having it done on the front end, but I really, my favorite parts of recording and my favorite part of the process is being surprised and changed by the folks I'm collaborating with.
So you've worked on a lot of music, but a big thing that I was really excited to talk to you for is because you were involved with an Adult Swim show that I really like called Joe Pera Talks to You. How exactly did you get hooked up in that project, and what was it like making music for a show like that?
Yeah, your first question, Joe came to a show I played in Brooklyn, and I had been familiar with the music, and we talked afterwards, and at some point discussed the possibility of doing some music for the show, and kind of just went from there. And then the process was fun. I learned a lot. I've done some composing before, but never on a long-form structured timescale like that for an entire season of a TV show. So, just learning all about how to set up my musical gear in a workflow that makes sense, and then and doing it in such a way that when there's feedback, I can quickly change it and adjust it to kind of what was needed, and generally speaking, everything for a show like that needs to be very specific, but it needs to be understated and match the scene. And because it's a very certain tone that's being sought after, you can't have anything push too much in one direction or another. So figuring that out over the course of those weeks and months I worked on it was really fun.
Was Joe pretty involved with, like, was he very specific? I'm like, this is what I kind of want you to make, or was like, go make some music, and then after you made the music, he's like, okay, so I want this to change, and then you made the changes, or like, was he just there all the time, like really, like, this is what I want?
Yeah, Joe was my point person for the whole show. There's a couple other there's another director, writer, and a producer, or editor that we would, I would interface with too. But it's all about figuring out Joe's vision. And the other composer had worked with Joe quite a bit in the past, Ryan Dan, who's a great musician, and so I could have a back channel with him and talk about it too. But mostly it was, there was some stuff of mine that they had already picked to use for the show, and then the rest of it was stuff that I really needed to just put through the lens of, serving what the scene needed. And although I definitely feel like I got my voice through, and I really enjoyed that part of the process.
What was the story behind, like, specifically the more recent, like, single art pieces, because they're really kind of beautiful and unified, and like, did you try to intend to, like, that unification, or was it just something that just sort of happened?
Well, I did want to have what you described take place for the release prior to going forward with the release. I wanted there to be a broad, thread of art with the same aesthetic, and I didn't know exactly how that would happen. I had a book by this comic artist named Kevin Huiman, and in that book he did this study on a whole bunch of different bands, like maybe like 50 different bands, and each frame would be this like sort of funny representation of a fictional band with the band name underneath. And one of those bands was called The Desperation Play, and it really resonated with me. And somehow, I think a few weeks later, I wrote a song which ended up being on the record. The song's called Night Walking Alone, and in that song I mentioned this band called The Desperation Play. And when the whole album was done and the song was done, it occurred to me I should probably let this comic artist know that I did this, just kind of to get a kick out of it. And I found his email, I sent him an email, and then at the end of it, I made a little like offhanded comment saying maybe we should make some art together sometime. And he was really responsive. He was totally on board. And that kind of opened up the conversation that ultimately turned into him doing the album art, and then doing all of these things that we call the illuminated manuscripts for each song. He did pages and pages of sketches of ideas, listening to the record, coming up with ideas, and then we would kind of hone them down, and we put like a distillation of all of those things on the album cover, which is sort of meant to represent just like kind of the whole world that exists in the record, in a pretty abstract way, of course. And then it's even turned into us making a lot of these short animated shorts, but we've now just completed a full-length animated video for one of the songs on the record that we're hoping to release in January, February.
The World Only Ends When You Die is the name of the album. What was the story behind like the writing of that album? Because just like the artwork, I feel like the songs have some sort of unification to them. Like the one flows right into the other, and it feels like, I don't know if you meant for like an arc to go from beginning to end, but it definitely feels like all these things are connected, and it feels like it's like a stream. It kind of goes all throughout. I don't know. In your eyes, what was the process like?
Well, thanks for saying that. It helps me feel like it's the work on that end was justified by knowing that it feels that way to other people. It's not always the case that I'd have like a grand vision. There is a fair amount of finishing a song but like choosing to believe that there is a way that they all connect. If you arrange them in the right order, because they're all written around, you know, similar times, and they do have similar themes. All of my songs have fairly similar themes. I think a lot of times I'm talking about death or mortality or like anxiety, and so knowing that, I kind of just arranged them in a way that felt they shared an arc. And it took some trying. Like there's a few different arrangements, and then it was only when I landed on this particular one that I was like, oh yeah, this is it. This works.
So the album sounds great. It's up on streaming right now. What's next for Skyway Man? I know this album just came out. You're doing a lot of a lot of stuff for that. But do you plan on doing any sort of like live streams or anything like for people to kind of observe? I know COVID's kind of going on right now, so live shows can't really happen. But do you have anything kind of cooking up for people?
We're going to be releasing the physical album in stores in early January or sometime in January, COVID willing. But there will definitely be some maybe pre-recorded full band performances if we can work out the details, and maybe touring. We'll see. I have a project that I'm about to start working on right now that it's too early in the process to even share details, but I'm gonna hopefully have more music coming out in 2021, even if it's on like a smaller scale.
So if people want to keep up with what you are planning on doing, how can people find Skyway Man on social media?
I pretty much only keep up regularly on Instagram, so you can find me on there. It's Skyway-Man, Skyway_man, and skywayman.com. That's about it. And feel free to reach out and ask me a question if you want. I'm around.
James, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, I have one more question for you. I don't know if you've ever watched an episode of Big Bang Radio Spotlights before, but I am a musician, but I also love film. I think the two worlds are very connected, and I feel like musicians have a soft spot for film. And I ask all the artists I talk to before they go, what is your favorite movie?
I think it's this movie called The American Astronaut, filmed in like the early 2000s. It's a kind of a space western, shot on black and white 16 millimeter, I think. It's really dry, slow moving at times, but there are musical scenes in it that are really, really impressive. And the punchlines that do exist in that movie are just fantastic.
Thanks to James for sitting down with us and talking all about Skyway Man's music. If you guys want to see more interviews just like this, you can go to facebook.com/Studio67NCC, youtube.com/NashComCollege, or you can find us on Instagram @Studio67NCC. Thank you all for watching. I'm Isaac Anderson, and until next time, stay lovely.